Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode. Jason's out and about catching up with Santa Claus on his run around the country, but we're going to welcome you here to a three-part series of Stepping in It. For your series, we're bringing together a collection of on-the-road conversations that we've had over the past year with leaders from moments captured in Alaska, Arizona, and Indiana that highlight the real work, the real challenges, and the real innovation happening in rural behavioral health. Each of these episodes were recorded live from the field, giving you an unfiltered look at what leaders in the community are navigating in real time. When you hear them together, they create a powerful picture of rural America in motion, resilience being built, systems shifting, and solutions emerging from places that don't always get a spotlight. We've put these episodes into a single series so you can experience the theme, the energy, and the momentum across all the states at once. So let's dive in.
Well, here we are, Renee. We're together for a podcast. First of all,
I know.
what a strange experience that is. But where exactly are we?
In the Captain Cook Hotel in Anchorage, Alaska.
Yes, it feels very Captain Cook, and there's
Yes.
just a lot of
Lots of boats.
old boats.
Lots of boats and
Yeah.
lots of places around. So Captain Cook, I don't know a lot about Captain Cook except kind of what I read this weekend, and he explored a lot of the world and landed here. So they've got a whole themed hotel, which is pretty cool. There's lots of neat,
A lot of ships.
lots of ships and big murals. And so we've been enjoying learning more history about Captain Cook.
Absolutely.
But before we dive into today's episode, we're going to talk today, just for those that are listening, about the National Conference for Rural Mental Health, because that's where we're here and why we're in Anchorage, Alaska. And we spoke at that conference. We're going to talk about that. But before we really dive into all of that, Jason, what is happening back home on the farm while you are away in Alaska?
Well, actually, I learned something about being on the farm in Iowa here in Alaska because, I complain about the deer a lot.
Yeah.
Renee, I
Yeah.
complain the deer are up in the yard,
Right.
eating the corn, up around the equipment. And that was all great until we were driving back to the Verbo. And will you believe there was a moose
A moose.
eating all the plants in the house right next door? Like literally
Yeah.
come around the corner and the moose are just wandering through downtown Anchorage.
This is true. I do not know how you keep houseplants or a yard or anything with the moose just eating
They
your
just start
things.
eating the flowers in the front yard. So I texted my brother-in-law and I said, the deer might not be so bad because it could be worse.
Right.
And he just sat back, oh my, because moose are big. I don't know if you've been up next to a moose.
They are large.
Very big.
They're large. And they're just everywhere.
Yeah.
Brent went out bike riding while we were at the conference this weekend, and he found at least three just on the side of the road. He said you can just listen for them and you can hear them eating.
We'll tell you a little bit more, but we went clear up, well, not clear up. We went a little ways into the interior, like this far when you look at the context of Alaska.
Oh, yeah.
And we didn't see any moose or
Not any
bears,
moose.
all of that.
No.
But downtown Anchorage,
everywhere.
all kinds of moose.
All kinds of moose. So we're going to talk today about rural, and rural now means something totally different than when we thought rural before. We're learning rural in a frontier is very, very different. And you know what? That's really cool about that. They still work on crisis services, 988, mobile crisis, all the things that we say is too hard because it's too far in Iowa. What do you think about that?
Well, first, the language, right? No one here says frontier.
No.
This is the definition of frontier.
Absolutely.
And even more dispersed than frontier in some areas. And they're like, no, we're rural. Which I found fascinating because, we go to some of these sessions sometimes at these rural conferences and, the 14 definitions from every different department of what is rural, what is frontier, what is this, what is that.
Right.
And up here, it's just like, we figured it out. We're rural. And they do identify that Anchorage is not rural, right? It's Anchorage and the rest of the state.
That's really true.
Right.
That's really true.
And so, Anchorage is a large population, 300,000 people here in Anchorage, and then pretty much everyone else spread out over, pretty much, what did you say, 1,600 miles?
So it's 1,600 miles top to bottom, which is sort of like the whole, almost the entire width or depth of the United States of America, the 48 continental. And then it's 2,500 miles across. So it's over 2/3 across the rest of the continental 48. And so it is a massive amount of land. And so here, instead of talking about the time to drive somewhere, they talk about the time to fly somewhere. So somebody says they were from what was that town? Fairbanks.
Right.
And they was like, it's only an hour flight. And that's how they describe
Right.
it. It's
Right.
6+ by vehicle per what we can see. The other thing that really describes rural to me is we were going to go out sightseeing, and there's one road north,
Right.
one road south.
Right.
These are our choices. And so you really literally are driving around mountain ranges to get places if you're driving.
Really, to get from Anchorage to Fairbanks, you have one road north out of Anchorage, and then when you get to Palmer, it splits, and you go this way around the mountains to get to Fairbanks. You go this way around the mountains to get to Fairbanks. Like, really, that's the only road going north.
Yes.
You know, and it's not like it's a quick drive to Fairbanks. Like, we weren't even close to Fairbanks, and you know, we took a road trip up to Chickaloon. Right, we were on our way up to Chickaloon, and we really got to experience, like, we didn't see anything.
No.
You know, we got to the restaurant.
Oh, wow.
In Chickaloon, overlooking.
Oh, wow.
The
restaurant.
The
in Chickaloon.
It was the restaurant.
The restaurant.
With one gas pump out front.
One gas pump.
One. So if you needed gas, it was available, but very limited. Right. And so we were up that, I can't even pronounce it.
I don't know. Matanuska?
I think that's it. Glacier. Right.
We were at a glacier. So the Glacier looks like a big, just other mountain, but it's really moving in the valley, and it's pouring into the river that goes toward the ocean. So as it melts, so it either moves down the river valley, tearing up lots of things as it goes, or it retreats back up depending on the weather.
We didn't learn very much on this trip, but we did see the glacier.
I was not impressed. It was a Jason thing. We did it, and we got to the one restaurant that overlooked said glacier.
That's right.
And I was just disappointed because they said the moose had been there and they left.
Right.
And so there was no moose. That was most part about that.
But really, the eye-opening part of that was how sparse it is to find things.
So true.
And we're so used to, you know, being able to drive, you know, across the Midwest. We think of some areas in the Midwest being rural, but this was kind of an eye-opener that we really don't know what it means to be isolated, or what it means to be in a village of 200 people that you have to fly to and then take a boat downstream for half an hour to get to your camp. And people live there year round. And so, you know, it really kind of helped put in perspective that some of the barriers that sometimes are created by folks as to why we can't do things or what's in the way have been overcome in other areas. Like the grit that folks have here of, well, we just figure it out. Yeah, really struck me.
I got to sit at a restaurant watching the weather, which you think is weird, but they have it in 5 chunks of this state because it's so large. So the southeast portion goes over toward Canada, and they have weather there, and then they have down at the bottom of the state, and that is your weather for Anchorage, and then that goes all the way up to Fairbanks, and then above that. So just so that you get an understanding of how far we're talking, it's a 2-hour time difference north to south on the sunset.
Right.
And right now there's so much light. It is light here a very long time, but it's 2 hours even longer than that the further north you go. And so they're doing weather, and then they proceed to go out toward the Pacific through all the islands. And so, you know, you're getting a bird's eye view of like the whole thing. So the temperatures vary widely, the amount of weather that comes in a space of that big. That's just like almost, like I said, 2/3 of the United States having one person cover that weather. It was just insane. So it's just common here. So they have conversations about there's all these little bitty airports. Most people fly to wherever they're going, but you can't get to many places by car. And so when you're start thinking mental health, you start thinking of crisis services. These are the things that we talk about in this state and others that we've been here through this conference. I got to hear a presentation in New Mexico, also very interesting. And so we'll talk about more of that as we dive into this.
Well, should we talk a little bit about some of the data we've discovered
Yes.
while we've been here? You know, we always kind of like to tune into to research and kind of look at, you know, what's going on. And so we've heard some really good presentations here, kind of talking about, well, where are they at legislatively? What types of things are happening? What are the real issues that are happening here locally? And, you know, some things really struck us. And you found an article, Renee, around youth suicide.
Yeah.
Which is really startling.
It is. It's really startling. It's generally its higher youth suicide rate is double than the rest of the 48 states. And so their suicide rate for teenagers is double. Kids, 1 out of 5 kids, or 20%, have attempted suicide in the last year. That's really high.
That's an actual attempt, not just a thoughts of suicide.
No.
And so when we think about
And that's reported
Right,
attempts.
right.
And so the other really sad news, while we're here currently, the one unit they had for subacute for teenagers in the one hospital system that had it is closing.
Right.
Now, that's an interesting story because it was an interesting type of service. It was considered subacute, so it wasn't residential. It was like 1 to 3 weeks, which isn't really a paid service. So for a long time, it was subsidized to occur, but it was the only thing like it in the state. And now it's gone or soon to be gone. And so you have these statistics about the number of people committing suicide, especially in that young population, while a key support is missing. And that's a really tragic piece of data.
And one of the things that came out was when it comes to response and measuring what they can do around prevention or what they can do around treatment, was really looking at the research and what the research methods are and able to do that, right? And it kind of goes back to the nothing about us without us type of philosophy. And so there's a really good book, and we're going to put it in the link that was highlighted yesterday. And it was research in ceremony, indigenous research methods. And it really made us think and ponder about, a lot of the research, the historical research especially, is skewed because it's not, it's not relevant to a lot of the indigenous communities and members, in just how the questions are written, of how it's scored, of really what they're looking at. And so really thinking about, how do we convene, right? We talk about this. How do you engage communities? And historically, the community didn't really have say in some of these things. And so as research was collected, as data was applied, it may or may not have been relevant. And so some of these issues now that we look at on the back end, like when we see the higher rates of suicide and we see the higher rates of substance use, we really have to rethink then prevention efforts and how do we get back upstream.
Right. And that leads us into the conversation that we really appreciated about what they wanted in that space. And one of the big things that they want, and what's weird to me is we talk about this even in the lower 48, but it's about being strength-based.
Right.
So Indigenous people, they know the challenges they're facing. They understand the high rates of alcoholism, the high rates of suicide. They understand that. But a lot of the data collected is just naming all of those negative things.
Right.
They really want to think about it from a strengths-based perspective and building resilience. And that's the title of today's of our conversation, is about building resilience. So the rest of this podcast, we're going to talk about the things that they figured out that help to build resilience in Indigenous country, but it applies to all youth.
Yeah, so let's just put it in perspective, because I think mindset really sets the stage for this, right? And so I was in a session around mobile crisis, and there was a question at the end from someone saying, well, how do you do mobile crisis? You don't have access to telehealth in all areas, right? You don't have high-speed internet, because we hear this all the time in the Midwest.
Right.
We can't implement something. We don't have fast enough internet. We don't have fast enough this. And the woman sitting in front of me, her husband couldn't be here today because he's a mobile crisis responder and runs the mental health clinic in their village. And this is one of those villages that you take a plane, then you take a boat, and then you hike or take a four-wheeler, from where you're at. And she's like, well, he had to stay because we've got a problem. The GF1 is out. I'm like, what's the GF1, right?
What's the GF1?
Well, it's the main internet. Fiber optic cables were severed going to their village. And the presenter asked, well, hey, I heard about that. Do you guys have an idea when that's going to be fixed? She said, hopefully this year. That would be 6 to 9 months. Right, hopefully, depending on like the freeze and if people can get to where this location where it was severed. And they're like, well, how do you do that? How does the hospital connect? They're like, we got Starlink satellites, and we're just carrying on. Yep. We can still access telehealth. We can still get therapists to people. If someone needs help, we have radio systems. They do shortwave radios. You call from site to site to site. And if somebody needs help, we send out a four-wheeler and pick them up. And so it was like, it wasn't even an issue. It wasn't about we don't have something. It was about, well, we just get other things and we fill the need and we carry on, and we can still do exactly the same things we said we could do when we had it more simply. And I just don't know if we always have that mentality
No, and
across
I think
the lower 48 states.
you and I talk about this all the time because we always talk about using what you have instead of what you wish you have.
Right.
And that's exactly how they did this, right? Is that going to be a timely response according to some insurance company, or is it going to, no, but that's what they can do. And so that's what they're doing. And that's amazing. And so it's a very different culture shift in their mindset. And they really want the lower 48 to figure it out because this culture of resilience of we can do something. We may not be able to do everything, but we can do something is really working for them.
Absolutely.
And they're being creative in how they do it. One other story that we loved, and I'm not sure how I would feel about this, but they were doing this study we're talking about, and we've got it in the show notes for you. We're going to talk about it now. Was done by the National Institute of Health, and the National Institute of Health brought these groups together, and they did these big convenings, but they had a lot of Indigenous people from multiple parts of Alaska, which is important because there's different types of folks and with different languages across the state. So they got them all together. Well, they were going to this one particular community, and it wasn't a community you could just get to. It's a community that you went by plane, trains, and automobiles, the whole thing. And they get there that day, and they were having a rally. So they were like, well, we didn't want to just push our agenda on them for the day. So we just went and did what they needed and went to this rally with them. And so you imagine that, the researchers and all the people who took the time off to get on the plane, to get to the place, and they don't even get to do their meeting because they're like, well, that's not what was most important that day. What was most important was to support the people in the community and to be involved in what they needed us to be involved in. I bet they got so much better participation and cooperation when that got done because they did that.
They actually met the community where they were at.
Yeah.
And it's so oftentimes we get stuck in that we have to complete the protocols. We have to get through the structured interviews. We have to get this survey data, and it has to be done today, and then it has to be packaged in a certain way. And I don't know, there was something refreshing about, we just figured out what the community needed, and it didn't matter how we were going to gather that. If we needed to go walk in a rally with folks to learn what we needed to learn, then that's what we were going to do. And just think what a better product and how much more engagement they had from the community, because the researchers actually stepped back and said, we're going to do what the community needs. It really refreshing for me to think about what if we applied those same concepts in everything that we did.
Right. The other really big piece they talked about is just connection to their traditions and their spirituality. This is a group the acronym is ANCHOR. It's the Alaska Native Collaborative Hub for Research on Resilience. And so there's a study we're going to link to our show notes today. But one of the big pieces that came out that they found as a protective factor for their youth was their traditions and their cultures. And so part of what they did with all of these convenings is they played drums because their drums and their culture is welcoming their ancestors into the place and their spirits to the place, and to be able to have a protective factor over the conversation, to bring in wisdom and guidance, those kinds of things. I don't think I've ever considered to have drums in the middle of an NIH meeting.
Right.
But, those are some of the small things that they could do that they really felt like that was something that they could own and did it their way. And so just the small changes like that still gathered the structured interview questions. And we went through a lot of those in that presentation. And so you could see that they were very similar to what you would do in many other cultures, but they worded things a little differently. And then they had this other component to it that it just really put their culture front and center rather than, trying to make it Americanized.
Right.
It just wasn't that. And so they just feel very good about this particular research, even though it shows a lot of the same challenges we already knew.
Right.
It didn't change the data on suicide. It didn't change those things, but it did give them hope that they are more in control and have more. But what some of the other things we talked about that were kind of outpourings of what they thought were protective factors. There were 6 or 7.
There were 7. So it was governance, opportunities for growth, and then connection, traditions, and spirituality. And so it was really, again, it was looking at the positive protective factors, because by increasing protective, we all know this in prevention, right? By increasing protective factors, then you decrease those risk factors. And so by focusing on the positive, when that's really the cultural perspective, then you're going to start to make a bigger change as you move farther upstream. And so I think that, it was really good information and really good data of kind of flipping the conversation. We're so deficit focused sometimes. We talk about what we're missing, or we need more of this. You think about it. How many times we have conversation? We need more beds. We need more hospital beds. We need more institutions. It's always we need more, we need more, we need more, but we never go back and say, well, what are we doing right? And if we did more of that, in 5 years, we're not going to need all of those.
Right.
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 We focus in the wrong areas. And it was refreshing here because we went back and we're like, we're focusing where it matters because that's going to change people every day. And we're going to reach more people and we're going to divert more people from needing all of those other services. And that's the reality here is you don't get to go to the hospital,
No.
right? Because the hospital is an airplane ride away across the state.
So expensive.
So you got to think about, how do we support people? How do we manage crises? How do we support people's mental health conditions and substance use conditions in their own community? And so you don't get a choice of opting out of doing something. Like critical access hospitals here don't get a choice of not dealing with everything that comes into their emergency department. They have to be prepared and have a plan.
Right.
To do that. And that it makes you think differently then, because when you have to organize and coordinate not just a boat trip, but an airplane ride and all these other things to then get someone, to that next care option. And then after 3 days, if they're no longer need hospitalization or acute care, somebody has to bring them back to their home community, because that's the right thing to do as well. Right. And again, it's not just that it's costly, it's time consuming. It just takes a lot to organize all of that alone. And I think that's where folks are getting much more focused on how can we leverage our community resources. And one thing that kind of came through was expertise in communities isn't based upon licensure or title. There are some folks who are really good at supporting other people, and it doesn't matter if they're a therapist or not.
Right.
What can they contribute to the health of the community?
Right. And the piece on governance, I thought, really stood out to me because it was two parts. One part on governance was having the elders involved. So really their community, their elders. And what a couple fun stories in that space is that the younger generation, they all went to fish camp. And they learned how to do all the things that you do to provide for your community in fish camp. But the piece that they kept speaking about was when the elders scolded them for not doing the right things. And that is part of that culture, to take the scolding, but to figure out that there's wisdom in what they had to say, learn from it, and take that feedback. So it's a feedback loop. And so having these elders at the head of these decisions really is important to them, because they are people that have lived under their entire lives as people that they see as wise and have gone before them. And then the second piece of governance that was really fascinating to me is that holding people accountable to do what they say they were going to do. Holy cow, wouldn't we be better off in all areas of life if we had that piece? So those are two protective factors, that if they say that they have their elders involved and that there is accountability to having them involved, like there's actually going to be some follow through, that actually is dropping suicide rates for teenagers. We would never make those connections, but the bad political stuff we have going on is actually harming our youth and our kids. And so, which makes sense. I mean, it makes sense, but they actually could see it in their research that those are important pieces. It gives people hope that you're going to work with people who want to understand what you're doing, but then they're going to do something about it. And that was really cool, because we haven't heard a lot of that in research on protective factors. It's kind of a little outside that box. The one we talk about all the time, though, is social interactions and connections.
Right.
And that's one we've talked about, because that's what the Surgeon General brought out a couple of years ago, that social isolation was a bigger killer than others. And in this communities, you could see that to be very plausible, right? If they're scattered everywhere and not connected. So keeping people together in just lots of forms, whether that's activities and fun for youth, but also family activities or church. They mentioned a lot of church opportunities.
Which really segues into that last piece that I think was so important. And that was, what does your community orientation look like?
Yeah.
Because as we think about workforce issues up here, workforce, of course, is an issue. Absolutely. Up here like anywhere else. And so we talked to some hospitals and how they recruit in, liver specialists from the lower 48 or other specialists that you need to have that aren't being homegrown here in Alaska. And so you have a lot of folks coming up, and how do you orient them to the indigenous ways? How do you orient them to the social norms of the local communities that are fairly insulated and isolated? And it really kind of got us thinking about, how do you integrate outsiders, even into your own community? I think about small towns across the Midwest. And sometimes there's not a good orientation program to help to make people feel welcome, to invite people to community events, where then you create that sense of community, where you eat with people. I think about there's always a celebration in every small town. And how is it engaging for everyone? Do you invite outsiders to that so that they can then be part of the community moving forward. And that's really shifted here as to how do they do that orientation more formally?
Right.
How do you onboard people, not just to the workplace, but to the community at large?
Right. And really making sure that your culture, that you know what your culture is, so that when you bring that new person in, that's what you expect of them.
Right.
And what's funny is I've done that in my office. I've created a culture that I wanted in the office, but you have to hire to that culture sometimes, or remove people that don't make that culture. But culture is a longer term situation. And so they were speaking specifically about hiring people out of the lower 48 that were not Indigenous and didn't come from their culture, maybe more individualistic. The lower 48, we focus on ourselves and our own promotion over the community.
Right.
And that's the opposite here. They want to do community. If community is promoted, then you're going to value from that. And so community's first, then you. So they have to watch for that in the hire, but then try to teach it. And very interesting. I'm guessing some people never get it. That's my guess. But then there's going to be some that you're looking for that ability to understand that concept. All of us should be doing that in everybody where we work, because we all know that it's the person's personal qualities and soft skills that make or break a job. You can teach a skill, but you can't teach people how to be, kind. You can't teach people how to be. And so just reinforcing that it's those people skills. Like you said, it's not the title, it's not the whatever, it's the skills that they have and placing them in the key roles, which is really cool. It was a really cool opportunity.
I've learned a lot here.
Oh my gosh, so much. We could do a whole nother podcast just on what we learned in the breakouts. We haven't even done that yet.
Not at all.
But before we go, we want to talk about the recovering politician self-care policy of the week. And I didn't even write this down, but in many cases, I talk about this on travel, having to make sure I take care of myself. This one is going to be one of the biggest tests of that, because it's 3 hours different from home. So we're literally, when it's 4 a.m. here, it's 7 at home, and I'm normally up around 5. So if I get up at 5 at a normal time, it's 2 a.m. here. So I've had to really think through and be strategic about trying to get sleep, trying to make sure I eat so that I can not mess those things up. It's been really weird. It's been very top of mind for me because it's a harder travel schedule.
24 hours from now,
I know.
We'll still be traveling. We are not going to sleep for the next 24 hours because we are actually still at a conference all day today.
And we're trying to do a red eye home. And
so
that's never a good idea.
It will be 24 hours.
I know.
And we'll still be on it.
And then there's a car road ride at the end of this.
Right. We should be in the car if everything else happens correctly.
Right. So this is why, everyone,
it's a long trip.
Taking care of ourselves is really important. So that's part of today. But today, thanks for listening to us today. We were in Alaska talking about the National Association of Rural Mental Health and their annual conference. We have learned so much being here. It's been beautiful. It's a beautiful place to be. You should come and see it. But it's amazing what they are able to do in that can-do spirit to get it done. We don't even have to worry about, what they don't have. They know what they don't have, but they still get it done. And it's still the same issues as we have in the lower 48, crisis, 988, all those things, CCBHCs, all the pieces that we're working on, they're working on here too. So it's a really cool opportunity to meet new people and to gain a new perspective. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.